Since the earliest days of civilization, a few highly talented, motivated men and women have led the way in discovering new technologies that have dramatically changed the way people live their lives. The discovery of fire, the printing press, the light bulb, the transistor, all these are examples of new technologies that have dramatically...
My name is Johannes, and I have a problem. I'm an artist and filmmaker from Vienna, Austria. As an Austrian, I carry the burden of a lot of history. Lots of music, lots of mass murder. And don't get me started about being a white, male, cishet nerd. But that's not my problem now. My dilemma is that I had a plan. I wanted to create an optimistic, invigorating documentary. Something special. Something about the spirit of freedom, the endless beauty of the American Southwest, a spark of hope, and a forceful statement against collapse. Something that I could sell to Netflix.
Superb idea, sir.
Uncle Sam?
Your celluloid show shall tell us an important tale. The wonderful story of how a band of American geeks stood up, brought many people together, and changed the course of history. Make it so.
Forget it. My plan is an epic fail.
Why?
It would be a film about rampant colonialism, abysmal politics, pandemic nightmares, epistemological warfare, and how the world is going to hell. Even worse, Jasmin Hagendorfer told me there is no hell.
There is no hell.
See? So, thank you all for tuning in. Goodbye.
Hush now. I insist that this moving picture show be presented. This shall be a true American story. And I want you to bring it to the silver screen.
I wanted to clean up my flat and to learn how to make sourdough bread. And I promised to catch up with some of my friends via Zoom, like Roland.
Uncle Sam is based on a real-life meat packer. Google it.
So I should avoid making him angry? Okay.
Start working, or I shall cancel your godforsaken snowflake ass.
In the USA, anything is possible. And that's the problem. Look at this peculiar part of the US. It will be the main geographical focus of this story. It's a region that is known as the Four Corners. What corners? Well, Europeans drew lines on a map, and voila, the four strange concepts of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado meet in one spot.
My name's Ryan Finnegan. I live in the Four Corners region of southwest Colorado. Durango is the town I live in. And it's a pretty unique area. Regionally speaking, in regards to distances between interstates and major railways, we're actually one of the more isolated populations in the United States. The closest large city is Albuquerque in New Mexico, and we're about 6 hours from Denver. So it's a pretty interesting place.
Today, Durango is a wealthy tourist town, but Puebloans were the first settlers in the region.
Almost 40,000 people lived on this mesa and in these cliff dwellings, but around 1300 they disappeared and took with them their story.
Other tribes moved to the Four Corners region and called it home long before the conquistadors arrived. The biggest tribe was the Diné, whom the Spanish named Navajo.
The damned Spaniards.
Actually, Christopher Columbus was Italian.
Christopher Columbus was a minor player in history and probably the most overrated personality in human history, who discovered absolutely nothing.
Europeans first tried their own people because they had this tradition of feudalism of working the land. Then they tried the Native American population. who was being devastated by diseases and the cultural oppression that they were being forced on, and this general destruction. Bartolomé de las Casas called for the church in Rome and the Spanish throne to end the oppression of the Native American by bringing over Africans, saving Indian souls by bringing over Africans who have no souls to save.
The American silent film The Vanishing American from 1925 represents a white supremacist view of the story. When Sunny Dooley began storytelling 30 years ago, it was the first time a Navajo person told these tales. Since then, she has worked as a folklorist and cultural consultant.
I am a Diné storyteller. I have lived in this area since the mid-1800s. Of course, I am not 150 years old. What I'm saying is that this land that I live on, where my hogan is, has been in my family since the mid-1800s. The Navajo people have lived here for thousands of years.
A friend of mine is an anarcho-syndicalist hacker of Navajo ancestry. We first met at 2600's Hope Conference back in 2012. I was dressed as a Soviet ambassador, and my friend fittingly wore a Con M27 hat, the fictitious evil mining company from Outland. Anyway, my hacker friend wanted to stay anonymous and sent me statements via email.
I don't need too much attention in my line of activism, especially my involvement in the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. So many thanks to Morningstar Angeline for portraying me in this documentary. Although I am a Diné citizen, I must be careful about the statements I make on behalf or about the Navajo Nation without their consent, especially in media recordings. It's complicated, a lot of intertribal disputes, but nothing I want to address now. And don't get me started about name tags and identity politics.
My hacker friend sent me a YouTube link to a talk by Slavoj Žižek.
One Indian referred to himself as Indian, and immediately a white, well-meaning liberal interrupted him. No, you're Native American. Don't you know that you are humiliating yourself? And the Indian gave a perfect answer. He says, no, sorry. Native American is for me much more racist. It means I am Native American, part of nature, and what are you, cultural American or what? He said, I prefer to be called Indian. In this way, at least my name is a sign of white man's stupidity. You know, they thought they are in India.
Crazy Slovenian Marxist. It is funny and true, don't you think? Anyway, I want you to remember we have roughly 350,000 enrolled tribal members. That number makes the Navajo Nation the second largest federally recognized tribe in the so-called US. Our tribe has the largest reservation in the country. It straddles the Four Corners region, and it's roughly the size of Ireland.
Connecting to artist Kudra Owens.
The Spanish, as they called it, explored the Four Corners region in the early 1600s. The conquistador Juan de Oñate, who arrived in the present-day New Mexico in 1598, is celebrated as a cultural father figure to the people who trace their ancestry to Spanish settlers. But he is also reviled for his brutality towards Native Americans.
His reign left tracks of blood you can follow to the present day. Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Raven Chacon reports about an incident in June of 2020. It involved the statue of Oñate in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Protesters, many natives, tried to pull it down.
We saw all around the country people taking down Confederate monuments and other kinds of statues. And here we started thinking, you know, why do we have this Spanish celebration? Why do we honor these men who raped our grandmothers?
A right-wing militia tried to stop it. One of them drew a gun.
He ended up shooting my friend several times, and my friend almost died. And my friend was there to defend those who were taking down the statue.
Spanish conquistadors came up from the Rio Grande into North America in search of gold. They did everything in their ability to destabilize our communities, our tribes, and our nations. So when a young Navajo girl cannot speak her language, it's because of that practice.
Missionary expeditions passed through the Four Corners in 1776 and gave names to many of the local landmarks. The Animas River, as it is called today, was originally christened the Rio de las Animas Perdidas.
The River of Lost Souls.
Well, one member of the Spanish expedition fell into the river and drowned. A bit dramatic, given the overall death count of the entire colonial enterprise. Navajo digital artist Stefan Yatsi has something to add to this.
For the First Nations, the apocalypse was the moment the first white colonizers made contact. When Europeans reached the Americas, they engaged in a transcontinental, greed-driven transfer of species, populations, technologies, and cultures. And the larger package of invading armies, slave raids, and a new legal system also came diseases.
It's a fresh start for your budding new nation. But beware your enemies. The natives might not be so happy about your exciting plans for their home. It's a game of ruthless strategy, wily diplomacy, and a great and glorious future. Colonization from Microprose.
Colonialism transformed whole villages and some of the most densely populated areas in North America into places of misery and unrecognizable death zones. Genocide and the progressive depopulation of the Americas has been followed closely by the rise of transatlantic slave trade, becoming the launchpad of capitalism.
But look at our beautiful fight to gain independence. Liberty!
The American Revolution of 1776 ended mercantilism and opened the Western territories for invasion and settlement, which created new domestic markets.
As a kid, I grew up on reruns of Winnetou and old Shatterhand films on Austrian television. Karl May, who wrote the Winnetou books, lived in the 19th century, but never visited the United States.
The idea that, for example, Native Americans or other colonized peoples are sort of enjoying the innocence of being cut off from modern civilization, that basically they are unspoiled by modernity and therefore somehow closer to nature, more morally and spiritually somehow superior. I think this is very much a trap that European romantics have stepped into, and it's a trap because it actually claims as the thing to strive for a situation that is very much a situation of poverty, of isolation, of lack of infrastructure, and of social collapse.
Native Americans became mystical beings, like wizards, creating a form of weird, positive racism that still lingers. Movies like Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, cemented this notion. It's the flip side of discrimination. I asked Carletta Chief, a Navajo hydrologist, why miseducation about Native Americans is so rampant, even in the US.
It's not taught in K through 12 schools. And if it is being taught, it's very minimal. And so when you go out and you meet an average American, many of them have stereotypes about Native Americans. Many of them don't even know we still exist in their own country today.
When I run anti-racism workshops, I say that racism is a strategy, one of many strategies used to maintain colonialism. It's used to maintain that divide and conquer and separate. And if you understand it from that perspective, then also understand that there's interpersonal, institutional, and systemic racism.
We inherit that optimism along with the legacy of American heroes who blazed the trails, settled a continent, tamed the wilderness, and built the single greatest nation the world has ever seen.
The Navajo people, the Diné Nation, were herded and rounded up by Colonel Kit Carson into a place that is called Fort Sumner, about an 8-hour drive east of where I'm sitting right now. That was called the Long Walk, Huelte. 10,000 Navajo people went on this long walk, and about 6,500 people came back.
What was driving the genocide of natives? Mining operations. Multinational corporations were trying to connect the mines of the West to the markets in the East with railroads. and native peoples stood in the way. They were sent to undesired land, the reservations.
American Progress is a painting from 1872 created by John Gast. Perhaps one of the most cited examples of propagandist art, it portrays a large and precariously clad female version of America floating westward through the air. Below, herds of buffalo and bands of natives flee the encroaching settlers with their symbols of progress: trains, wagon trails, telegraph wires, and America herself wearing the star of the empire on her forehead.
The Four Corners region became desired land following the discovery of gold along the banks of the Upper Animas River in 1860.
Criminy!
The two biggest towns in the region are Durango and Farmington, which is an hour driving distance to the south. Farmington, New Mexico, is very poor and working class. It is a border town to the Navajo Nation. 1 out of every 6 residents of Farmington lives in poverty, and the town is ranked among the 50 most dangerous metro areas in the country. Durango always had it better. Durango took shape in 1881. We might say Durango was invented by the railroad. Durango became a center for coal and smelting operations and made many people rich.
Newly introduced power plants supported mines with electricity. And in early 1887, the Durango Light and Power Company delivered the first electric service to the town. Durango was lit up by electric light way earlier than many big cities on the coast. Today, the building is a science museum, the Powerhouse Science Center, and the location of a little hackerspace.
Through the decades, Durango remained a small but prosperous community. The Wild West flair and railroad lured tourists from all over the world. They also built a ski resort in the 1960s. They called it Purgatory.
Hell yeah!
Punk legend Jello Biafra grew up in Colorado.
Even to this day, the Wild West factor in Colorado is kind of like it was when I was a kid, where people are either very liberal and very ecologically conscious, even before the word ecology or environmentalism was really well known. It was called conservation. For years when I was little, the governor was a guy named John Love, whose whole slogan was "Sell Colorado." And he lasted, 12 or 16 years or something, because all the ski boom happened. So, yeah, we want more ski resorts, more ski resorts, more ski resorts.
Mr. Biafra is no patriot. He put Swiss penises on an album cover.
Research finds women who own horses live longer than those who don't. Implied correlation, horses make you live longer. Reality, if you own a horse, you can probably afford health insurance.
The U.S. health system was converted to a business model in the 80s based on federal government studies into healthcare cost containment. The initial idea was good, but then the masters of business administration and the bean counters infected the system. From there, they built an immense infrastructure that serves itself rather than the patient's healthcare needs.
Now, I have to tell you, it's an unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated.
Our antidote to what he is talking about is to have the United States join every other major country on earth through a Medicare for all single-payer program guaranteeing healthcare to every man, woman, and child in this country.
People tend to work 52 weeks out of the year. We don't even have a mandatory maternity leave. It's go, 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 go. The US is a high-risk, high-reward society.
I got the flu. My bill was like $700. I think I had COVID though, but I went to the emergency room because I was barely making it. And I was there for maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. They gave me an IV. They gave me some Tamiflu, and they just took a nose swab, and that was $700 later.
But are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
Well,
but I believe
that
the government has a responsibility to care for the people. I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant. people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It's a disgrace. And this country has vast wealth. You just look at what something like Star Wars. The money spent on Star Wars, already spent $20 billion on it. If these guys are permitted to go ahead, they will spend $1 trillion on Star Wars. Think of what that money could be used for.
Take a close look at the track record of this company, and you'll see that we have gambled in markets traditionally regarded as non-profit. Hospitals, prisons, space exploration. I say good business is where you find it.
American imagination about public health care and public transit has been constrained by years and years of propaganda. The fact that it takes 3 hours to cross LA during rush hour, and the fact that we can't imagine public transit, we start to fish around for other solutions, even if they seem outlandish. Robots will save us, self-driving cars, because what we're not allowed to do is look back in time and imagine that somehow we might rebuild the systems and mutual aid that got us to where we are, that made our civilization possible.
Mutual aid is being painted as socialist. But if guaranteed housing, a free healthcare, a job guarantee, and free education are anti-American, why are those military recruiters' main selling points?
Many Navajos are forced to join the armed forces because there are just no other options for them.
Be all you can be.
In December 2020, a Navajo man and former Marine wanted to pray at his ancestors' petroglyphs at the Petroglyph National Monument near Albuquerque, and 2 rangers tased him because he allegedly went off the trail. On Instagram, he writes, "This could have been a civil interaction. The law doesn't work for the indigenous. The government doesn't give a shit about us."
You know, white Americans, they don't want to think about it because it's just a horrific tragedy that's incomprehensible. You can't wrap your head around it. There's no way of tying it up in a bow. It's just a nightmare, you know? And so it's like, almost like, oh, I don't want to think about it. It's easier to think that it was over. And indeed, if you look at the history of representations of Native Americans in America, in the U.S., that already, like, one of the things that's coupled to the noble savage is the kind of like the dying Indian, and the idea that, like, they are noble people but not made for our modern world, and so they are ever going out into the sunset. They're in the twilight, and you have that. There's a famous image of, like, the slumped Indian on the horse, and it's this very powerful image that was very popular in the early 20th century, and it sort of announces their day is done. Now it is our day, and there's some melancholy about it, some kind of false romanticism about it. So that stands as, like, that's the easy answer, as opposed to going, oh wait, everybody's still here. You know, they're all still here.
More than 90% of the reservation technically belongs to the US government. It's managed under a trust by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and less than 1% is actually owned by individuals who can freely sell their land or build on it.
All the programs and assimilation and sterilizations that went on, that was all part of the motivation to basically what they say, kill the Indian and save the man was the motto. And all of that has cascaded into the American system, the education and government system to this day. So I think it is very deliberate.
Libel!
Before the war, the US boarding schools for Navajos tried to kill their language and culture. But in the 1940s, the US military used the Navajo language as an unbreakable code to stop the Axis powers from monitoring military communications.
So with our language, it saved thousands of lives, and it shifted the course of the war in America's favor. In some amazing way, how Navajo people contributed to the longevity of what we know as America today.
And by the way, the only Navajo Code Talker museum is in a fucking Burger King, and the biggest exhibit is a printout of Nicolas Cage. The Navajo community faces many ills from the outside.
On the 5th of August, 2015, an environmental disaster happened at the abandoned Gold King mine near Silverton. A certified contractor of the EPA,
yes, you hear right, the U.S. Government Environmental Protection Agency,
accidentally caused the release of an enormous amount of toxic wastewater into the Animas River.
The river of lost souls.
By August 10, the highly acidic waste reached the Navajo Nation, and an estimated 2,000 Navajo farmers and ranchers couldn't use the water anymore. And this area is considered the breadbasket of the Navajo Nation.
EPA officials claimed immunity under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and therefore never paid any compensation. The dark shadow of U.S. colonialism never seems to end. It just takes different forms.
The Navajo Nation had already faced food and energy, water insecurities prior to the pandemic, where food deserts exist across the Navajo Nation, where there are only 13 grocery stores across this vast landscape. And so they do not have access to energy, which means they cannot refrigerate fresh foods.
35% of the residents don't have running water in their homes. Some of my relatives on the res use that same water at least 3 times. They use the same water for cooking and for cleaning up. They can't wash their hands that many times or for that long. The CDC recommends you wash your hands for at least 20 seconds. That's a luxury.
Aaron Yatsi grew up in the Navajo reservation and now works at NASA building robots for Mars. He once said that every time he goes back to the reservation, it reminds him that Earth and Mars are not that different. Sounds kind of romantic, especially for a space nerd like me, but I can't stop thinking that it sounds like the US government banished the Navajo people to Mars.
Well, we live in a desert. Water is so important because it's so scarce. We don't have access to it in the same way that many cultures do around the world.
I remember growing up being told by my grandmother, don't get used to drinking water because we don't have it, and someday you're going to be fighting for it.
A quote from Mad Max comes to mind.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence.
If you go back to World War II, the American government got very, very interested in mining uranium when they found out that most of Americans' uranium was actually in the Four Corners. And so thousands of mines were opened right here on the Navajo reservation, and the government didn't care at all about the tribe's health.
My dad did become a surface miner and went on around with these extractions for uranium during those war times, was affected by it and got cancer.
When we look into the history of nuclearism in the American Southwest, what soon becomes obvious is the indigenous presence. An environmental sociologist, Valerie L. Kuletz, points out nuclear geography overlaps indigenous geography at almost every phase of nuclear production and use. Since uranium was discovered on Navajo lands in Arizona in 1941, uranium mining and milling has been conducted on land belonging to indigenous people. The presence of indigenous people in the nuclearized American Southwest is conspicuous. Throughout most of the Cold War period, however, indigenous inhabitants were obscured by the pre-existing settler discourse about desert lands as barren wastelands.
We've had catastrophes too, with the 1979 Church Rock spill being the most infamous. That accident released more than 1,100 tons of uranium waste to the environment.
The Church Rock spill was the largest accidental release of radioactive materials in US history.
So there's really no way to deal with this waste.
Decades of uranium extraction and other forms of environmental imperialism have left generations of my people with major health problems.
You're talking about instant 3 generations being impacted in real time from the legacy of uranium contamination, even though the last time the uranium mines here have been active have been over 40 years ago.
We have a lot of cancers because for a number of years, we have had drinking waters that were contaminated. Not only do we have a lot of cancers, but we also have a lot of underlying health issues like diabetes, like heart disease, like high blood pressure. And we have a lot of social ills like alcoholism. And there are a lot of suicides in my community.
Unemployment has been high for many decades. But even when jobs were created, it was often a story of exploitation and pollution. In the 1950s and 60s, Fairchild was one of the biggest semiconductor manufacturers. They created circuits for the Apollo computer that helped humans travel to the moon.
In 1965, Fairchild opened a semiconductor plant in the Navajo Nation. At its peak, the plant employed over 1,000 Navajos, mostly women. A company brochure celebrated Dene as culture workers that produce circuits as a part of the reproductive labor of expressing Navajo culture, rather than for wages. The claim centered on the opinion that circuits resembled complex geometric patterns found in Navajo rugs. The plant manager spoke of the untapped wealth of natural characteristics of the Navajo, the inherent flexibility and dexterity of the Indians. Management chose Navajo women in reality because of their so-called docile nature. And due to lack of labor rights, reservations didn't enforce US laws on minimum wage. In this way, they were foreign countries. That same management redefined semiconductor manufacturing, a tedious and unhealthy job, as creative labor.
The Navajo Nation is originally a matriarchy. We were ruled by women together equally with men. But nonetheless, women have lost power over these years, and it has a lot to do with the fact that the Navajo Nation no longer has the same kind of governance that it used to.
American pop culture conveyed a racist and sexist portrait of history, as computer historian Jason Scott reminds us.
You ask an American to cast their thoughts back through American video games, early 1970s to now, and say, so, tell me about the American Indian games. They're going to have to struggle. And then they're going to remember Custer's Revenge, a game that was designed to shock for the Atari 2600 console, whose entire point of the game was for you to avoid Indian arrows so you could rape an Indian squaw who was tied to a post. It was, in other words, the first time we're really seeing sexual action in American consoles, and it's just being used to denigrate Indians.
In the year 2000, Myra Nez was a 13-year-old Navajo woman who won an Apple iMac, sold for its internet readiness. But she had no way to actually connect it to the internet. Her home had no running water, much less phone service. Then, President Bill Clinton decided to add the Navajo Nation to his Digital Divide Tour.
She will always be associated with the first U.S. president to visit the Navajo Nation.
And 20 years later?
There's a telecom company that came in and actually got a contract with the Navajo Nation in the early 2000s. And they laid fiber all over the Navajo Nation. But there was a conflict, a legal conflict around the ownership of that fiber. Now we're sitting in the position where in the midst of this pandemic, we have fiber all over the Navajo Nation that we can't light because we don't own it. Even though it's in our lands, it's in our territories, and it's vital for the future and the sustainability of our communities.
COVID-19 arrived on the reservation in early March 2020. The late winter winds were still blowing off the mesas, almost like a sign. The virus came in from Tucson, Arizona, with a man who made the long drive back to a small town in the Navajo highlands. Patient zero was, what sad irony, a Navajo and an evangelical.
I am in shock. The virus entered into the Navajo Nation through a Nazarene Christian revival in Chichen-Bitwa, Arizona. The congregation bussed in a number of communities in vans to that rally. And at that rally, the virus became the contagion. All those people went back to various areas of the Navajo Nation. And so COVID-19 hit our community simultaneously.
We wouldn't have had to see it spread like wildfire like this. But even after it was spreading, our own tribal administration was still giving go-aheads and allowing churches to carry out services that were bringing tons of people together and not practicing social distancing protocols that could have actually helped us get at the front end of the communal spread of this virus much sooner.
COVID-19 took hold of the Navajo Nation, hopscotching across families and clans, churches and towns, and leaving the reservation with a virological catastrophe. This brings us back to Ryan Finnegan from Durango, Colorado. I first met him years ago at a crazy cocktail robot event that I organize. He made a musical instrument that serves booze.
I got involved pretty early on, around that time, 2006, 2007, because I started geeking out. I taught myself robotics, physical computing, and in Durango, there really wasn't a lot of that.
He started the Durango Maker Club, and a couple of years later, the Powerhouse Science Center approached him, and they agreed to create a little hackerspace.
Powerhouse Science Center, Powerhouse Science Center.
Became the director in 2018. And it was kind of a dream job, like philanthropy job for me, to step away from my business and get to be the director and work with the kids every day. It was awesome. We developed a really great internship program.
Ryan did a great job building up a community and helped set free the creative nerdiness of its techie clientele and their own little hackerspace.
I still don't know what that is.
Ah, shut up and listen.
Hackerspaces, or its more tinkering-oriented form, makerspace or fab lab, are community-operated places organized with an open model. They are places where people with technological interests can come together to socialize, collaborate, share and expand their knowledge.
Hackerspaces are fundamentally a rebranding of an old concept. If you think of guilds, artist colonies, activity cooperatives, they're a logical extension of this basic human need to come together and learn from each other, work from each other. And they've evolved along the lines as you'd see any artist cooperative.
There were experiments for open workspaces as early as the 1700s. Using the Werkhaus in Vienna, Johann Joachim Becher tried to fix problems such as poverty and unemployment. You can also see connections to the amateur radio culture of the 1930s and MIT's Tech Model Railroad Club, but the necessary conditions came later.
In the 1950s and 1960s, there were definitely a lot of atomic war DIY preppers. But what's more important for the hackerspace history is the Back to the Land movement, which spawns the whole Earth catalog. The late 60s and early 70s were defined by the hippies attempting to establish new ways of social, political, economical, and ecological relationships. A lot of experiments were carried out concerning the construction of new spaces to live and to work in.
You know, those people weren't preppers, they were retreaters, right? They wanted to step away from industrial civilization and return to something that was like a progressive version of being Amish, a degrowth agenda maybe.
Stuart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog and later the influential Well online community, once said, "The Navajos taught me organization, anything I know about organization. I learned at the Navajo peyote meeting one night." Does this sound as cultural appropriation? Just joking. I mean, I'm glad it worked.
In 1972, Rolling Stone magazine published an article by Stuart Brand, Space War. It dealt with the emergence of a new outlaw culture. the hackers.
They are shy, sweet, incredibly brilliant, and I think more effective in pushing the culture around now in good ways than almost any group I can think of.
Instead of trying to completely turn the old world into a new one, people started to build up tiny new worlds within the old world. Thus, hackerspaces fit into a countercultural framework consisting of alternative cafes, farming cooperatives, communes, and especially squatted houses. To live in a squatted house, that means occupying an abandoned and unoccupied building, you needed tools and a concept of maintaining a livable environment.
There wasn't a lot of consideration for liability or things like that, and that's why a lot of these groups were so successful. So it makes me curious about what an organization looks like that's built from bottom up.
We're coming up with new values of community, intimacy with nature, sexuality, freedom of the individual, mysticism, new political orders, whatever the values were. But then there's like, well, how do we build this? What does it look like? So there's an explosion of architectures, of technological mechanisms, of community bulletin boards, of even how to structure a commune. That's an architectural problem. How does the power work? How do you distribute? How do you grow? All of these kinds of questions are also really maker questions.
In the 1970s and early 1980s, many parents, usually baby boomer dads, bought expensive equipment like VHS camcorders or home computer systems, but hardly ever used it.
Punk is dad.
Rebellious new wave teens found interesting things to do with tech, and it started one of the biggest DIY movements of the 20th century. So punk, years before cyberpunk, was a movement of youngsters appropriating technology.
I've always really liked, call it punk spirit, call it pranks, sabotage, hacking, whatever. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for creative crime. Creative crime is the last unspoiled art form left on Earth.
One key document that was shared in the early 80s that's also influenced how I see the hacker ethic is something called the Hacker Manifesto by a hacker called The Mentor, who wrote it just before he was arrested for computer crime. And as he said in that phenomenal text, that circulated in online chat rooms and magazines and BBS rooms, he said, "Yes, I am a criminal. My crime is that of curiosity."
The fact that you hang out with a group of people that call themselves techno-anarchists is really viewed as very, very dangerous and very, very subversive.
Put the coin in. At this particular place, which is Malaysia, I have to send 2600 first to get it cleared off. There you hear a ringing in the States. When we hang up, please leave any messages after the tone. I made a call to the United States, and of course, my 25 cents comes back.
Hacker magazine 2600 started in 1984, and it galvanized the spirit of the movement.
It started out with a magazine, but it's growing in many different ways. We have meetings all over the world now where people get together and explore things and trade information.
They could teach, they could demonstrate. Sometimes they did have fun with it in terms of mocking or entertainment or for challenges. It was a way of creating a community, and building that community feels very anarchic. It feels very against the American narrative of the individual doing something all by themselves. No, it's a bunch of people that get together and they can do this. They share what they know. They do what they can.
The major online spaces were all dial-up based networks. In 1984, hacker and LGBTQ activist Tom Jennings started the fast-growing FidoNet, and one of the first queercore punk fanzines. Different subcultures started to overlap in these newly emerging online and offline spaces.
Creative keyboard jockeys, hardware freaks, and BBS users started to meet in real life, founded clubs and conventions, and so hacker culture fostered meeting spaces like the Loft in Boston in the early 1990s.
Everything in the loft was carried by hand up these stairs. So just remember that when you see the vacs, the 2 vaxes. So here we go. Some people have asked, like, what exactly, what is the loft? And I was just like, well, it's like a clubhouse, Except we don't have secret handshakes or anything. But it's neat too when we have like friends over, like visiting from out of state or whatever.
We wanted to have an open discussion. We wanted to show that we are not some hackers sitting in a dark corner doing illegal things.
Debates about the role of states and governments, also in online spaces, started from there.
Freedom is something that the state grants. The authority sets the framework in which the citizen's will is allowed to be critical. The idea that freedom is where the state is absent is a huge misconception.
Freedom in society, political freedom, is not the same as free will. Instead, it is a rule that dictates how it should be exercised. The material side of freedom in a market democracy is, and this is important, private property. That's where freedom ends pretty quickly.
What?
Freedom! Freedom!
Consider myself to be part of 2 tribes, the Navajo people and the hackers. I know that might sound full of cheese, but it's true. My hacker tribe is complicated too. It went through many rifts and schisms, but one thing is sacred to me, our moral values. Many of the principles and tenets of the hacker ethic contribute to a common goal called hands-on imperative. Hackers believe that essential lessons can be learned about the systems, about the world, about taking things apart, seeing how they work, and using this knowledge to create new and more interesting things. Employing the hands-on imperative requires free access, open information, and the sharing of knowledge. It's a radical approach.
Are you using the tools or the tools using you?
Now, the amazing thing about hackerspaces is that it's a zone of excess. It's not economically viable. It can't scale up to an industrial level. It can't educate people at a societal scale. It's extra. And that's the precious, beautiful thing. It's this extra space.
Hackerspaces provided room where people could go and work in laid-back, cool environments. They are, in sociological terms, third spaces. Spaces that break through the dualistic scheme of mainstream culture, because they are neither spaces to live nor places to work. They are creative in-betweens to play with problems that may result in new and innovative solutions.
Do-it-yourself communities, to really function as communities, still require values of collaboration, cooperation, interpersonal support, and solidarity. In a word, care. And that's something you can't plan. You have to live it.
The hackerspace movement, which we suddenly found ourselves being a part of, grew to thousands of them around the world. Whereas in 2007, we don't even know how many there were, maybe 40. So community is hard work. It's always hard work. It's a relationship, and all relationships are hard work. And it's even harder when there's a whole group of people, all with different family backgrounds, perhaps with cultural differences otherwise. It's a lot of work.
So maybe that's also something that's less cool about hackerspaces, that sometimes they can seem daunting, they can seem exclusive, shady, and maybe if you are a non-mainstream brand of hacker, maybe if you are a girl, for example, or maybe if you are from a different part of the world or a different ethnicity, you might not feel as comfortable venturing out to a hackerspace.
Come on! Nerds are the success story of the century. Look at Elon Musk, or that expert on women, Mark Zuckerberg.
Sure, the biggest companies on the planet are nerd enterprises, the result of what Barbrook and Cameron called the Californian ideology. The fusion of hippie mentality and tech capitalism into a new worldview. Look at Burning Man and look at Google. They share the same DNA.
The capitalist system is a highly adaptable entity, so it's not surprising that alternative spaces and forms of living provide interesting ideas and can be milked and marketed and co-opted. Nerds can be rebellious outsiders and disruptors, but also docile supporters of the status quo.
No, fuck no. It was, how do we actually try to find new and interesting ways to connect to one another so that we can help each other solve problems? And that's what these hackerspaces are doing. So that's badass.
I can open up a window on my computer that is completely empty. Within a few hours, have a drawing in that window of a three-dimensional object. And with a few more hours, I can be holding that object in my hand. This is science fiction right here. And we're living it.
The bad side of the hacker maker community is like any subculture. It's a combination of essentially hauntology hipsters and appropriators coming in, and that the only reason why they're coming in is because the certain core people in the community has essentially sold the community out.
Greetings programs!
But sometimes you see particles of light at the end of the tunnel. 2600 magazine is still being published for almost 40 years now, and it represents the ongoing countercultural struggle for the soul of hackerdom.
I mean, look at their Summer 2020 cover. Wow!
How ghastly.
Make magazine, founded in 2005, could be seen as its bubbly antithesis. Glossy, friendly, customer-oriented, longing to turn the concept of making into a brand. But DIY culture needs to go beyond buying an Arduino, getting a 3D printer and having a weekend hobby.
The best way to be a successful NGO is to have a business, right? Like monks making honey or something. And so makerspaces start to become more like tech accelerators and incubators. And so there is a lot of neoliberalism in maker spaces. At the same time, there's a strong streak of anti-authoritarianism and a suspicion of capitalism, particularly globalism.
In 2012, Make received a grant from DARPA, a U.S. Department of Defense research agency, to create makerspaces for teenagers.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
2 opposable thumbs up.
In 2001, Finnish philosopher Pekka Hemanen promoted the hacker ethic in opposition to the Protestant work ethic. In his opinion, the hacker ethic is more closely related to the virtue ethics found in the writings of Plato and Aristotle. They can also be found in Navajo tradition. I like this perspective a lot, given the Protestant work ethic and WASP colonialism are to blame for the abundance of atrocities committed against my tribe. That's why I also dislike the old 1990s comparison of cyberspace to the Wild West. Early visionaries, predominantly white males, characterized the internet as an electronic frontier, comparing its explorers to so-called pioneers and settlers. Free market nuts love this shit. They say gold mining communities went from wilderness to busting towns of tens of thousands of people in a matter of weeks and were largely peaceful without government intervention. Of course, this thinking doesn't factor in genocide.
So get on the wagon, rolling west, seeking a land that's new. Get on the wagon, rolling west, there's plenty of room for you. Get on the wagon, rolling west, out to the great unknown. Get on the wagon, rolling west, or you'll be left alone.
Old West feeds into that narrative of people coming to forge a new life, right? To be pioneers, if you will, which is very romanticized. But as I've said to some people before, when you talk about pioneers, pioneering is not very glamorous. Pioneering is terrible if you've played Oregon Trail, right? Pioneering is perhaps cannibalism, suffering, typhoid. It's all of these things.
The internet is no Wild West. It is a byproduct of the computational needs of World War II and the Cold War. The main purpose of computing and networked computing was maintaining efficiency in the construction and guidance of nuclear missiles and maintaining command structures after a nuclear exchange. Real-life Dr. Strangelove shit.
The history of the atomic bomb is the history of America aiming all of its efforts towards a scientific progress for the purposes of domination. In this way, it's the same as the work to go to the moon, it's the work to build the transistor, and it's the work to create the social networks that are currently dominating the planet.
Now Whitey's on the moon.
There's a portrayal of technology as a great liberator, but oppression is really profitable. So you will see promises of complete freedom and expression only to be just smacked in the face with the reality of the world that comes after.
Let me tell you a story about John Wayne.
John Wayne.
The long-term representative of Wild West ideology most likely died of cancer due to radiation from nuclear tests. In 1954, he shot a horrible biopic about Genghis Khan, featuring John Wayne as, ta-ta, Genghis Khan. They shot the exterior scenes downwind of a US government nuclear test site. Here's Wayne playing around with a Geiger counter. They say it crackled so loudly, the Duke thought it was broken and shrugged it off. The cast and crew totaled 220 people, including many Native Americans. 91 members of the team developed some form of cancer, and 46 died of the disease, including Wayne.
The American Southwest was strategically chosen for nuclear militarism and industrialism in the early 1940s. That's why it's such an important part of the global pop culture, from UFOs to giant ants. The US blew the first nuke not too far from our land. It detonated near the Mescalero Apache Reservation. What can I say? Welcome to the age of radiation poisoning, of the atomic family and atomic annihilation of Cold War, distrust, and hyper-technologization. It's an age that started here on my people's land. It's a story that turned into a planet-wide, networked media ecosystem, a world of paranoia.
They are tired of not living their normal lives.
No more masks! No more masks!
The flu kills more than coronavirus.
When George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe, and then he died, and now we're wearing a mask, and we say, I can't breathe, but we're being forced to wear it anyways.
I'll tell you another reason I hate masks. Most child molesters love them.
I want to quote the Dutch virologist Marian Koopmans, who gives a definition of viruses. And she says, a virus is a kind of shipping package with a single purpose: to protect a piece of genetic material and transport it from A to B. That genetic material, she says, is important because when it enters one of our body cells, it has everything it needs for using that cell's machinery to create new viruses. The only purpose of that genetic material is to make new virus copies. It is the perfect parasite, end quote. And this really tells us that the notions of computer viruses and online viral information, like, for example, memes, are much less metaphorical than we might think. And that conversely, COVID-19 could be seen as a kind of piece of weaponized information in its global performativity. It uses globalized supply and production chains, business and travel and budget airline-enabled mass tourism, consumer economies, internet platforms from Airbnb to Tinder, and acts as an entity that exploits and weaponizes the weaknesses of present-day globalized capitalism.
Human bodies are hosting myriad of organisms. We are multitudes, a perception that is more true than what we see in the mirror each day. We are at pains accepting that we are the result of symbiogenetic evolutionary encounters and improbable evolutionary events.
As Kim Stanley Robinson said, even as an individual, you're a biome, an ecosystem, and to survive you depend on any number of interspecies operations going on within you all at once. Margaret Thatcher said that there is no such thing as society. What small-minded bullshit. We are societies made of societies. There are nothing but societies.
Low-income households in the US are ticking time bombs. Most poor people are stuck with horrible jobs of wage labor. Their living conditions are bad, they're under constant stress, they don't have access to health care, it's impossible to get treatment for any kind of disease, and this is even more extreme in the case of reservations. The possibility for self-help and the potential for innovation is still reduced by many, many factors.
Let's take engineering. Only 3,000 Native Americans are employed in engineering occupations, out of 1.7 million people in the US employed in engineering occupations. There are initiatives with the goal to start a culturally contextualized Navajo makerspace and to create a design that is respectful to the distinctive needs of the community. But they have been very recent.
Hello, I'm Peter Romine. I teach electrical engineering at Navajo Technical University. We have a ABET accredited electrical engineering program, the first one to ever happen at a tribal college.
Peter actively fosters Tinker Spaces by organizing the annual Diné Maker Fair. One of his female students used to work as a nurse.
And so she had a lot of ideas about how we could make stuff that would help people that she had as patients. And then she knew about the fact that a lot of Navajo have medications that need refrigeration. And so this was to basically be able to provide cooling for medication for people that don't have electricity, that live off the grid.
Peter organized the Great Diné Maker Fair on March 12, 2020.
It was the last Diné Maker Fair that Peter organized because a few days later, America shut down. COVID hit, and it hit the Navajo Nation in the Four Corners like a bomb. Take health infrastructure. Since the mid-1980s, people of the Navajo Nation Council were trying to convince the congressional delegation sponsored legislation to fund a new hospital. Well, fast forward, there is no new hospital.
The nation was hit very hard, more intense than even New York City.
We know of stories of Navajo nurses and meds at small Navajo clinics that slept in their cars in the clinic parking lot for long periods because they didn't want to bring COVID home to their family and communities, you know?
Very early in the days of COVID, the Federal Emergency Agency FEMA identified 3 regions in the US as problematic: Seattle, New York, and Farmington on the northern border of Navajo Nation.
Why? Because many, many sick tribe members needed to find help outside the reservation. That's why the hospitals in Farmington and Durango were overwhelmed by the influx of patients. The Army Corps of Engineers looked at the situation in Farmington, and they offered to build a 200-bed hospital for COVID patients right next to the main hospital. But the city declined, since it didn't have personnel or machinery for another hospital.
I'm a critical care nurse at San Juan Regional Medical Center in Farmington. I work in the emergency department and in the ICU, intensive care unit. I'm seeing this pandemic up close, and it's crazy. The emergency room has fewer patients right now, but the ones we are seeing are incredibly sick. They can't breathe. The fear in their eyes is unlike fear I've ever seen in my patients' eyes. It's the fear of dying. We're doing everything we've been trained to do, but unfortunately, too often, it's not enough. So many people are dying. Husbands and wives are sick together. Whole families are sick. It's taking a major toll.
When a family member dies, the Navajos send a notice to a local radio station so that everyone in the community knows.
Usually the reading of these notices take 5 minutes, but this past week, I listened to 45 minutes of death notices, and the ages ranged from 26 to 89. I'm in shock.
In Navajo culture, generations are packed into small homes. We knew people in communities where, living in a house of 8 or 9, 2 or 3 people died and everybody else was sick.
We have many other health issues that makes this virus so viable among us. We have diabetes because we don't eat well. We have a lot of heart disease. We have alcoholism and high rates of suicide. We have every social ill you can think of. And COVID has made these vulnerabilities more apparent. I look at this virus as a monster feasting on us. We are the perfect human being for it to invade.
If our own government was responsible for the deaths of almost 100,000 people, You really want to know?
Hold your horses. Citation needed.
Well, let's ask Emerson Tan, who worked in Sierra Leone helping the UN manage the Ebola virus epidemic. So, where were the feds? Huh?
To go back to the roots of the COVID-19 disaster, we actually need to go back to the presidency of this man, George W. Bush. He set up a national strategic stockpile, which had about $8 billion worth of drugs, personal protective equipment, and other equipment like ventilators, a national pandemic playbook, and a national pandemic task force, arguably staffed with some of the world's best experts. Trump gets rid of this structure, basically doesn't really see pandemics as a threat, because the last pandemic was in 1918, which is 100 years ago. In the intervening years, most of this personal protective equipment is now made in China, and Trump is having a trade war with China. At first, Trump tries to effectively dismiss it. As the first cases start showing up in the United States, the very first thing that Trump does is that he appoints his experts from the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci. Dr. Birx ran the Ebola control effort for the US and Liberia, and Dr. Fauci is a world-renowned expert in infectious diseases. However, Jared Kushner comes along. We're not quite at the stage yet where Donald is starting to tell people to go and drink bleach yet. So Jared brings in all of his business consultant buddies at this point. The only problem is they're now trying to buy all this protective equipment from China. Then Larry Kudlow turns up and he basically says that states, for example here led by Andrew Cuomo in New York, should have to fight each other and the United States government for access to the PPE from China. And they're fighting with the federal government for this. But at the same time, the federal government, with its business consultants, is trying to sell the national stockpile back to, via private vendors, back to the states. And in fact, actually, the whole thing turns into really just kind of like fucking chaos, really. Now, if you are a little local hospital and you're watching this, A, you don't get any PPE, and your staff start getting sick, and your patients start getting sick, and then people start to die.
But it affects virtually nobody.
That's what she said.
And that's how you end up with little hackerspace in Durango supplying hospitals for equipment that actually is in the national stockpile. Pretty sad, really, isn't it?
In March 2020, Ryan had an idea and contacted his hackerspace friends.
We started asking ourselves the question, how do we solve this? And I think that's kind of part of the maker spirit too, is that we don't always look at a problem that pops up and say, is this my job or should I solve this? Or, what about the liability? We just kind of have a natural tendency to just try to figure things out, and kind of a lack of fear of failure in a way too, because like I tell my students all the time, as a self-taught engineer, I'm not a do the math kind of engineer. I'm more like a plug it in and see if it blows up kind of engineer. And we make a lot of mistakes, and I think that's gives us a comfort with failure, and it kind of is an impetus to just take on a problem. And I think that's probably part of what happened and why people just jumped in so fast. It's just not even a question. Like, is this my job? Is this my role? It's like, no, we can do this. Why not?
America, spread your golden wings.
Ryan talked to the director and the board of the Powerhouse Science Center and told them of his plan to make equipment for hospitals.
They thought I was batshit crazy, honestly. They didn't think that the hospitals were going to accept something that a bunch of maker nerds built in their garage, right?
I would say, frankly, I was skeptical that hospitals and doctors would actually want homemade PPE gear from us. And it took us a week or two to realize that no, absolutely, the need was so big that they were looking for help anywhere they could. And we're more than grateful to hear what it was we could do here in the space.
The doctor that we were working with from San Juan Regional, Jared Myers, came to us one afternoon. I believe it was a Sunday, and there was a handful of us there. working on another project, and he came in, he brought a PAPR unit, and he told us he was gonna bring one just so we could look at it, and he sets it down on the table. And in a really somber way, he sits down, he's like, guys, you're gonna wanna sit down for this. And he says, so we just had the meeting yesterday with our pandemic crisis team, and he said, guys, if you can build us 50 of these in 10 days, you'll save lives. And I think every one of us there, I mean, our hearts dropped to the floor, and we saw kind of how scared he was in a way. And this is a guy who's just been, he'd been in there a lot, he'd been helping us through our prototypes, just a great human being and just always a happy, joyful person. You could see really kind of how sad he was for his staff and how scared he was for his staff. And it took us about 10 seconds to process that, and then we got to work.
How can you protect your mouth, nose and eyes from viruses? You could work behind a glass barrier. This is pretty effective, though not practical if you need to get in physical contact with other people, or if you move around. Or you could wear personal protective equipment, so-called PPE. You could wear airtight goggles and an air filter to breathe through, something like a gas mask. But do not try to lift heavy things with a gas mask if you are not 100% physically fit. A clever solution is to wear a face shield or a bonnet that is constantly flooded with fresh air. The air is produced by a battery-powered ventilator equipped with an air filter. A hose attached to it blows the air over your head down the face. The little overpressure under the hood is enough to keep out the viruses, blow in fresh, clean air, and the front window won't steam up as your exhalation air will be blown away. They are called powered air purifying respirators, or short PAPR. There are of course commercial products on the market, but what if there aren't sufficient numbers available? So the real challenge was to develop a DIY workflow to create PAPR units. And that's what happened at Durango's Maker Lab.
We took that thing apart, we figured out what it was. We ordered parts. I drained my bank account. This was before we even had funding. And we had a design by that morning. And I think it was just an amazing confluence of people that were there at the time. Some of the Maker Lab members that were there. One of them had a lot of experience with actual apparel design and build. And, you know, I do electronics, so I was able to handle that side of the circuit design and build and stuff like that. And we did it. In 72 hours, we had a functioning prototype. Farmington Fire Department come up and do what is a kind of unofficial PAPR test. It successfully passed the test.
These powered respirators were going to be such an essential piece of gear in the midst of an airborne, highly contagious illness like COVID. This is a tool that hospitals have in their arsenal all the time, but in a typical setting that might sit in the closet for 360 days out of the year, for that 1 or 2 patients a year with TB who walks through your door, and suddenly overnight, every patient who walked in the door was potentially highly contagious. And San Juan Regional really had that sense of, this is the tool I want to put on every single staff person I can to give them the best protection possible as they're interacting with patients.
Maker Lab helps healthcare workers. With shortages nationwide, community leads effort to manufacture masks, gowns.
The Makerspace brought everyone together and organized a 200-plus person operation and was the first in the U.S. to build and successfully test a PAPR hood and unit for hospital use in just 3 days, and made 230 of them the following week.
So we went from a couple people just trying to 3D print stuff to having essentially an entire organization that was shipping stuff all over the country and doing things that no one else had been able to figure out how to do yet.
Never underestimate the power of a nerd. We are creative, we are energetic, we run in packs, and we stand for making this a better planet. That's what these stories are about. They're about heroism. They're about making this a world of justice and inclusion. If we were smart, we as a society would take a page from the nerd playbook and work to make this a planet where we can all live long and prosper.
I think one of the things that made this project so special is Durango feels like it falls in this perfect size community to pull this off, that if we were much smaller as a community, I don't know that we would have had the resources and expertise to actually do something like the Papper Project. But if we were much larger than we were, it would have been hard to recognize where the needs were. So I think what made Durango so special is that we're a place where the engineering department at Fort Lewis College, the makers here at the Powerhouse, ER doctors who are here in Durango and working down on the Navajo Nation all know each other. We run in circles together, and the fact that not only could we pull this off, but we knew people who had needs, I think was really what made it special.
The Makerspace initiative made masks, face shields, Papper units, pretty much the whole range of protective equipment.
We produced about $300,000 worth of medical supplies in about 5 weeks, which was just crazy. And we were going 18-hour days and just couldn't stop. And it just seemed like it had to be done. And, we felt like we could do it. And I think it's a testament to the maker movement. It's a testament to the maker spirit.
Just the look on their faces of relief was definitely worth the hours and the effort that everyone put in.
Our priority in launching the project was our local community, and we defined that as a 75-mile radius of Durango. We ended up sending supplies to places with a tremendous amount more manufacturing capacity than we had.
What was interesting is that at one point, a couple weeks in, we came to find out that it looked like we were the largest and furthest along operation in the United States, which was wild, in little old Durango, Colorado.
I think the most exciting part for me was that during all of this, I had to have an emergency medical procedure done. When the doctor came into the room to perform the procedure, he was suited up fully in one of our Papper unit outfits that I had helped put together. He told me that the only reason he could be performing these medical procedures is because of the Makers Lab and because of all the volunteers.
So the community was very helpful, but dealing with the medical institutions was complicated.
It was interesting, dealing with the different institutions, for one, in the Four Corners area. So we ended up providing PPE to a lot of different area medical facilities. Mercy, which is owned by Centura Health, so that's a major multinational corporation. San Juan Regional, which is a nonprofit organization. Shiprock, which is a federal organization. So different org charts, different administrations, different policies, different practices. There was varying results and varying. San Juan Regional pulled us right in. They had me sitting on their crisis team for a little bit and sitting in some of the meetings and asking me how we could ramp up production, how many of these we could make, things like that. And they assisted in that process and accepted it with open arms. Mercy was a little bit more of a challenge. I was in email correspondence back and forth with the director of their HR department when we were already making these things, and we had friends that were ER doctors, we had friends that were nurses. I think that's something about Durango and a small community, that we were able to just give them directly to the nurses and the ER docs to do test runs and get them into the hospitals.
In Durango, ER nurse Cammie Schumann was worried as she and her coworkers treated patients showing symptoms of the coronavirus.
And I said, this is real. I saw about 5 of these people today, and it's here, and they are sick, and we are running out of masks. We're running out of equipment, and I'm scared for my family.
Story is, when we did our first bigger batch, we got them to a friend of ours. She distributed them in the ER that night. It was on a Sunday night. The sitting admin person that night got wind of it, made an announcement that they all had to put the stuff into a supply closet and they weren't allowed to use it. What I hear, they were pretty upset, and they even almost threatened to strike.
A nurse at Mercy Regional Medical Center, speaking on the condition of anonymity, said the hospital, at the direction of Centura Health, initially did not allow its workers to use PPEs made and donated within the community, even though the hospital had shortages.
And by Wednesday morning, one of the organizers on our team, we would have morning coordination meetings in our PPE efforts, and she's a nurse, it was Jessica, and she pulled up, she's like, oh my God, guys, check this out. Every morning we get a report of the new policies and practices handed down from corporate, from Mercy, about our interactions with COVID patients, right? And in the Wednesday change in policies was that all staff, if entering a room with a positive COVID patient, must wear an N95 mask and a Maker Lab face shield. So by name. That night, Wednesday night, I was interviewed by Fox News Denver, and it was 5 o'clock news.
We have to do this. Like, it's a call, you know, it's like a wartime effort. I mean, if we don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Coloradans pulling together, building battle gear to fight an invisible enemy.
And I didn't know at the time, but they also interviewed the nurse who we handed that PPE stuff off to, and she brought it to the ER. Now, she didn't say anything too salacious about, you know, the back and forth with them. She mentioned a few things about, you know, it was more really thanking the Maker Lab team and, you know, hey, if it wasn't for you guys, we'd be, you know, in trouble here.
Thank you. You know that you saved lives.
Maker Lab is a nonprofit group that needs help buying all that material to make that gear. They're doing so through a GoFundMe. We're posting a link on our webpage.
And well, corporate got wind of that. They didn't like that. Later that night, a gag order went out to all employees of Mercy that they were not allowed to appear on social media and or mention the Maker Lab name, or that they were using the gear we were providing. It went so far as apparently that the nurse was even kind of threatened that if we didn't take it down, the photos that we had up of their staff wearing our gear, which we were again just using to raise money, that she might be fired. So we took it down. And we continued to make it, and we continued to supply it for them, and it was kind of like fight the bigger fight, you know, as opposed to like trying to go to the media with it and make it a story at the time.
For the outcome of the initiative, it was probably the best for the Maker team not to seek confrontation. And as always, there's more than one side to the story. But it is still interesting to see how corporate America dealt with the fact that hundreds of volunteers applied hands-on hacker culture to the COVID problem in the Four Corners. At least Mercy Hospital posted something on Facebook.
You know, what else are folks supposed to do with their privilege? That when it comes to actions of each of us, we do what we can. And if we have the tools to be able to do a little more to make things better, then cool, that's great. That's a great start. There's also a systemic thing that has to be addressed.
Isn't Durango supposed to be a tourist spot living off its colonial past, such as its fancy railroad and beautiful landscape, as this town's PR proclaims? No, it isn't. Isn't it a problem that a bunch of whites were responsible for the COVID initiative? Isn't it white savior bullshit? Not at all. It made a difference, and that's what counts. They're part of my tribe, the tribe of hackers.
In late spring 2020, I contacted Mercy Medical Center in Durango. I wanted to do interviews about the Hackerspace initiative. I never got an answer. I also contacted the PR coordinator at San Juan Regional Medical Center in Farmington. The PR person canceled our interview a day before, saying, quote, "Our hospital CEO has learned of our planned involvement in your documentary, and he does not wish for San Juan Regional Medical Center to be directly involved. I'm sorry, as I was unaware of this when we have been emailing back and forth." End quote. The CEO's name is Jeff Bourgeois.
I think that everyone whose bread is buttered by the current system is very worried that anything that casts it into disrepute has a real chance of accelerating its demise and maybe putting them out of a job.
One medical professional from Farmington feared losing their job for involvement in our documentary. Another member sent us an email. There is a shortened and, in accordance with our lawyer, anonymized version read by my dear friend Chase Masterson.
I met some of the Durango hackers when I went to pick up some DIY gowns, and I'm well aware of the amazing efforts that the Maker Lab has made. But current times are incredibly complex, and while I realize that an interview of my experience might be innocuous enough, I also need to be thoughtful of the implications of my role as a medical professional in a small Republican town on the edge of the Navajo Nation.
In a climate of racial tensions, the doctor worried about cultural sensitivities and misconceptions. For self-preservation, the doctor had to step away from politics, protests, and gross misinformation. I tried again months later, no luck. But I got an email from another medical professional saying that, quote,
The Durango Maker Lab project was an incredible success and an important part of the story of the pandemic as a whole. Wow, I get all the great anonymous lines.
Yep, I love doing documentaries without the documenting.
I see do-it-yourself culture as a collective, unbranded, unheroic effort, although the phrase do-it-yourself might be read as some form of Ayn Randian heroism.
Not a lot of people know what groundbreaking stuff happened in Durango, but it's a classic open source story. Make magazine dedicated a cover story to DIY COVID response teams and the most important projects in the US, and even they forgot to mention it. As you can see, there's not a single project marked on the map of the American Southwest.
Yeah, it's interesting in the open source because it's oftentimes less about the cred, if you will, but sometimes it's about that too. But we like to share. And sometimes, yeah, the original source gets lost, but that's okay because it's about process.
It inspired many other hackerspaces, and moreover, it left a legacy of know-how and blueprints still in use.
I know for a fact the open source blueprints made it as far as, for example, Indonesia. Lots of the units based on the design were made around the world.
The world looks to us.
So in some ways, hackerspaces are brilliant. The pooling of all these resources, the utilizing of everybody having one big wish and aiming in that direction and resulting in this fascinating, beautiful space. But you're also one step away from total goddamn chaos.
Which is big time disagreement.
I think the biggest challenge we probably ran into was the balance between getting materials out into the hands of local providers and first responders locally versus trying to scale this as a national project and disseminating things that became resources for the whole worldwide maker community.
It's a pretty tough decision if you think about it. You have a very limited amount of time, energy, and money. Do you invest all your resources into local help? Literally saving the lives of patients you might know. Friends and family in Durango, Farmington, the Navajo Nation. Or you divert some of your time and energy to create schematics and document and distribute them so more communities around the world can profit from it. Glad I didn't have to make that call.
If you can magnify the effect of what you've just uncovered or understood and you have a design that you can share, then that can benefit, tens of thousands of people. And so I think that was a start of some of the conflict in our group as it got so big and I was really heavily in charge of the kind of strategic relationship building. And of course, that's a tool in that process. So I felt a deep obligation to my maker friends and compatriots to get those designs and data up. And there was some disagreement about that.
If you deny having an ideology around what you're doing, it turns out that mostly you're following an ideology, but you just poorly understand it.
In mid-May 2020, Navajo Nation surpassed New York State for the highest COVID-19 infection rate in the US.
We want to bless the state of New York, their healthcare professionals that are on the front lines. It's a great partnership. I want to say thank you to the movie stars like Mark Ruffalo, Sean Penn, and many others.
So through this whole period of time, as you can imagine, things were going fast. We were moving fast. We were running loose. And as a maker group, that was fine for us, right? But we also are a group that sits with a board of directors, and we're of a larger organization, the Powerhouse Science Center. And I think it's a certain point, there was some hesitation on the board side of wait a minute, what are we? Are we a medical supply company now? What are we doing, And they started pulling in the reins a little bit, and cutting some of the stuff our R&D department was doing. We had a complete R&D department, research teams going, and we were working on a ventilator. And I think our design on our ventilator was one of the better designs in the country. We had one of our maker members, Norb, come up with this brilliant idea of using air pressure to constrict the ammu bag, which a lot of people were using. It was a good design, and they nixed it. They wouldn't let us work on it anymore. They didn't even want it in the building. They felt that there was liability-related issues, which there aren't. I mean, organizations all over the world were building ventilators. And so there a few of us were pretty upset about that, and then they kind of ended up eventually kind of pulling the plug on the entire PPE thing. I mean, they phased it out, so they said, but, I ended up basically being eliminated.
Yeah, I think, there were, it was a project that definitely came with drama. Some frayed relationships in the process of that. By the middle of May, some local businesses were starting to reopen. Many of the volunteers who had come to us and dedicated incredible amounts of time in the first month and two were, frankly, I think, getting burned out. And we really were balancing, can we sew face masks indefinitely? Is this a 6-month project, a 12-month project? And I think we were all starting to be really relieved when the answer back from hospitals were, you filled an incredible breach, an incredible need, and it's okay. You can go back to your families, you can go back to your jobs, because we actually know how to get our hands on face masks again.
Jeff's statement from August 2020 aged poorly. We now know that this was only the end of the first wave. Hospitals all over the US needed to deal with missing equipment. But this situation shows that volunteers alone can't solve systemic problems.
Hey! Loose lips sink ships.
Sadly, the schism at the makerspace in Durango can still be felt. Brian hasn't set foot into the makerspace, the space he founded, since May 2020, and many of the other members of the group as well. It really ripped the nerd community in Durango apart, and it'll take a long time to heal.
It's hard to point the finger. It's nobody's fault. You shouldn't have to put that kind of stress on yourself. You shouldn't have to work for 12, 14, 18 hours per day for months, fearing that if you stop, people will die. In hospitals, personnel can at least get psychological supervision, but not at a little tinker space. A couple of nerds can change the world, but they cannot save it. More than likely, it will traumatize them.
The Powerhouse Initiative provided Mercy Hospital in Durango and many other institutions with thousands and thousands of dollars worth of free gear.
So in July of 2019, I was in a motorcycle accident. I was unfortunately in between health insurance, and apparently my motorcycle insurance company does not cover medical-related expenses in an accident. And so, of course, the hospital bills in that kind of situation without insurance, I mean, it's $10,000 a night just to stay in the room. They were around $130,000, $140,000 or something like that for that week. I started consulting bankruptcy lawyers and starting to talk about, well, am I really gonna ever be able to pay this back? Now, that whole process kind of stalled, honestly, when the PPE took off. And again, you just ask yourself one question. It's like, can we figure this out? I'm like, yeah, we can, so let's do it. I never really thought about it in that context. And then at the end, after I was we were finishing up the PPE process, it was really interesting timing too. They posted a big thing in the Durango Herald from all the doctors and nurses and from Mercy, thanking everyone at Maker Lab for our efforts and everything that we did. And about 2 days later, I got a summons. I was served.
The anesthesiology department sued Ryan for the open bill. That's American healthcare in a nutshell.
It only takes a major illness, a permanent disability, or a prison sentence to force an American out of the mainstream and into abject poverty.
In September 2020, Navajo Nation officials said they would participate in the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine trials. Navajo people would be test subjects, and so they had a virtual town hall meeting.
We give you praise this morning for another day of life. We thank you, Lord, that we can be about the important topics such as this vital day, Lord, where we talk about COVID-19 vaccine trials, phase 3, Lord Father. But you know all things, Lord. You are our great physician, Lord. Question I have, which is largely a dominating question here on the Navajo Nation from our people. The vaccines are being made very quickly. What reassurances do we have that they will be safe? Thank you, sir.
Lizer asked only one question about the safety of the Pfizer COVID-19 trials, but the topic dominated comments from listeners. Many Navajos expressed suspicion. What about the vetting process? How much money did the Navajo leaders get? And the idea that the government was using Navajo people as guinea pigs. Given history, it's hard to blame them for their skepticism. Nevertheless, Navajo Nation took part in the trial and took one again for the American team.
It's been a battle of corporations, honestly, for different things. And, speaking from a Diné perspective and talking about tribal government, reason why we all come from a grassroots perspective and make our own government accountable is because of all these different things that go on, these backdoor dealings and embezzlements and all these shady deals, that put our people deeper in the hole.
Navajo culture is a DIY culture. We have no other choice. Take a look at what we have, what has been left for us, and what we do with it. We have a unique way of dealing with limitations. We need our own maker culture and maker spaces, our own equipment. We need to learn and teach. I'm a person that likes to work on problems bit by bit.
To manifest that future, we have to do it for ourselves. We have to create our own tools. We have to be imaginative and innovative with how we create supply chains and bring the resources that our communities need so that we can build what we need to build.
A lot of hackerspaces tend to focus on what is being made, but not who. Navajo activists are pursuing the creation of spaces that work in the context of Navajo culture and combine the best of both worlds. One aspect is to fight solutionism, the idea that the right code, algorithm, or robot can save all of humankind's problems.
You can't just go into a situation and believe you know what's best. And we see that in technology all the time. We are convinced, right? I'm in the Bay Area. I'm in the hot spot for technology in the United States, We all the time think we know best, and that is so far from the truth. So I really hope that these folks who mean well and are trying to solve problems are lifting the voices of the people who are impacted and having them involved in the problem solving as well.
Rebecca Solnit, she says that crisis, in a medical sense, is what doctors call the moment at which you either recover or die, right? That when a patient has reached their crisis, they either get better or they go into decline. And I think America is in that sort of crisis. I think that when we talk about all of the different pathologies in American politics, and obviously there's so many of them, that the thing that makes them seem overwhelming is imagining that each one is a separate issue that has to be dealt with separately.
Patrick Henry, during the American War of Independence, says, "Give me liberty or give me death." And what in America is give me liberty and death.
Societies don't last forever. So if society gets to a point where it can't learn to evolve, then I think, at that point it figures out that's when revolutions start.
The US gave up on building good transportation and healthcare systems.
I taught some Chinese students last year, and we were discussing democracy. And I said to them, just straight to their face, I said, is China a democracy? And they went, yes, of course it is, because our living standards go up every year. And what they implied, the second half of it, which they didn't say, is that you're not a democracy because your living standards don't go up every year. They used to go to America to see the future, and now they go to America to see the past.
In America, you can change political parties, but you can't change the policies. In China, you cannot change the party, but you can change policies.
When written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger, and the other represents opportunity.
Stop showing this fortune cookie propaganda. Now! You can always depend on Russian technology.
Oh my!
COVID and racism are connected in America and all over the world, because if you want to talk about America alone, everything in America is connected to racism. We are founded on racism, and the core of hacking, I should say, in my opinion, is noticing weak spots and publicizing those weak spots at minimum and coming up with potential solutions at maximum. Racism itself is systemic, and so because it's a system, it can be hacked.
If we look at it from a different angle, you could say that systemic racism has already been hacked by white supremacists and the people using them as an engine to hold control as a minority.
Trump's election was an epic hack of the racist system. QAnon is racist malware.
I think, American colonialism ties into why America is doing so poorly at wearing masks, at quarantining, because American colonialism involves taming rugged frontiers and seducing land and subduing people and just kind of bending opportunity to your will. And so COVID stops that. COVID makes Americans have to be collective when so much of our society is based on individualism.
The Navajo Nation handed the Republican state of Arizona to the Democrat Biden. They cast 76,000 votes at 97% for him. Some of them spent 2 hours on horseback getting to the polls.
The battle to control the virus, the battle to build prosperity, the battle to secure your family's health care, the battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country.
We have accepted over time and over generations that none of the corporations, the nonprofits, the philanthropic organizations, the governments are ever going to give us the resources we need to get to where we're going to go, because that's a threat to the whole way that they've built up institutional power and white privilege.
Humanitarians don't save people, systems do. In my work as an activist, I acquired the conviction that the left is too focused on race and not enough on class. Lasting victories were achieved when working class and poor people of races fought shoulder to shoulder for their rights. Multiracial organizing is key to health and economic justice. Liberals use identity politics and race as a way to counter calls for redistributive politics. I have to call it what it is: reactionary bullshit.
How do we continue? I hear the word, this is the new normal. And I want to say, this is the new real. We cannot live the way we lived before. Everything has changed.
No, 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 no! That is not the film I wanted you to make.
I told you.
I should have asked Werner Herzog.
What are you going to do?
We can't leave the collapse of civilization to other nations. We better do it ourselves. Oh, one last thing. What is it with the title of your film?
Well, we need to stop hacking at leaves. We need to cut the roots. Okay.
Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee, even though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my sons shall be nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee, oh, nearer to thee. God.